They thought they had control. Two officers stopped a lone driver, ready to show their power. But what they didn't know was that the woman behind the wheel wasn't just any driver. She was their new boss, the chief of police. And this traffic stop was about to change everything. Kendra Hayes had always been a quiet, strong woman, someone who knew how to rise above challenges. After years of hard work, today marked a new beginning, her first day as the chief of police in Cedar View. It was a goal she'd fought for, overcoming countless obstacles, including a justice system that seemed set on holding her back. As she drove down the winding road into town, the early morning sun bathed the horizon in a warm glow. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. This was supposed to be a day of celebration, but Kendra couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered in her gut. Cedar View wasn't just any town, it had a reputation. Known for its conservative culture, its police department had long been criticized for bias, especially against minorities. Kendra had read the reports and heard the stories. Many officers had expressed their displeasure at her appointment, especially since a black woman was now leading their department. But Kendra wasn't someone who would back down. As she approached a traffic light just about to turn red, flashing blue and red lights appeared in her rearview mirror. A patrol car pulled up behind her, sirens blaring. Kendra's heart rate quickened. She knew this wasn't just a coincidence. She pulled over, the sound of tires crunching over the grass as she slowed to a stop. Two officers, both white, stepped out of the car. The senior officer, a tall man in his late 40s, walked toward her with a slow, controlled stride. The younger officer, his face tight with suspicion, followed closely behind. Kendra rolled down her window, her pulse steady but alert. The senior officer leaned in, his eyes scanning the inside of her car before focusing on her. "License and registration," he said flatly, his voice carrying a practiced authority. Kendra reached into her glove compartment, pulling out the documents without saying a word. She'd learned long ago that in situations like this, silence was often the best approach. As she handed them over, the senior officer's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. The younger officer, however, seemed ready to say something. The younger officer wasn't as calm. "What brings you out here?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. "This area isn't exactly safe, if you know what I mean." Kendra's stomach tightened, but she stayed composed. "I'm on my way to work." "And where exactly would that be?" The younger officer pressed, leaning in closer. His smirk made it clear that he had already formed an opinion about her. Kendra paused for a moment. She could reveal her role right then and there, end the game, but something told her to hold back. She'd been in this situation before, too many times. The power imbalance was obvious, and she didn't want to kick off her first day by causing tension with the very officers she would soon be leading. "You'll find out soon enough," she replied calmly, locking eyes with the younger officer. There was no anger in her voice, but it was clear she wasn't afraid. The senior officer, sensing the situation was about to escalate, stepped in. "Let's not make this difficult, ma'am," he said. "We can take this further if we need to." There it was, the hidden threat, the subtle display of power. Kendra felt her patience wearing thin. She'd dealt with this kind of treatment for years: disrespect, condescension, and assumptions based purely on her skin color. She had fought too hard and climbed too high to let it slide now. Taking a deep breath, Kendra decided she had played along long enough. "That won't be necessary," she said firmly. "I'm Chief Kendra Hayes, and I suggest you rethink how you're handling this situation." The air shifted instantly. Both officers froze. The senior officer blinked in confusion, his brows knitting together as the realization hit him hard. The younger officer's cocky expression dropped, replaced with shock and a bit of panic. "You're the chief?" the senior officer stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Yes," Kendra said, her voice steady. "And I'd like to know why I was stopped and why I'm being questioned like this." For a moment, neither officer spoke. The younger one stumbled over his words, trying to come up with an excuse, but the damage was already done. The power had shifted, and they knew it. The senior officer cleared his throat, struggling to regain his composure. "There must have been a misunderstanding," he started. Kendra didn't let him finish. "No, this isn't a misunderstanding," she interrupted sharply. "This is exactly the problem. You stop people like me without reason," Kendra said, her voice steady. "You make assumptions and try to flex your authority, believing you can get away with it." The senior officer opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He knew she was right. Kendra's calm, unshaken demeanor only made their actions look worse. "You see," she continued, locking eyes with them, "it's officers like you who make people lose trust in the system. And it's people like me who are here to change that." The two officers stood in silence, their faces drained of color. Kendra could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on them. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been unfairly stopped, questioned, or harassed because they didn't fit someone's idea of who belonged in certain spaces. She stepped out of the car, standing tall as she addressed them. "You'll be reporting to me personally for the next few weeks," she said. "I'll be reviewing every traffic stop you make, and I suggest you think long and hard about how you handle yourselves from now on." The senior officer finally found his voice. We didn't mean any disrespect, Chief. It won't happen again." Kendra nodded, though she knew his words were empty. It would happen again, not with these two maybe, but with others. That's why she was here, to root out the deep-seated prejudice that had plagued Cedar View's police force for far too long. "Good," she said quietly, before turning back to her car. As she drove away, Kendra allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had won this round, but there would be many more battles ahead. Her role as chief of police wasn't just a title, it was a responsibility. A responsibility to make sure no one else had to go through what she had just experienced. Later that day, Kendra gathered the department for her first meeting. The tension in the room was thick as she stood in front of the officers, her presence demanding attention. She recounted the events of that morning, leaving no detail unsaid. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," she began, her voice steady. "But I am here to make it clear that this kind of behavior stops now. Every officer in this department will be held accountable for how they treat the people of Cedar View, no matter their race, gender, or background." A murmur of discomfort spread through the room, but Kendra didn't flinch. She had spent her life fighting for justice, and she wasn't about to stop now. "This is your chance," she continued, "to prove that you are the kind of officers who serve with integrity," she continued, "but know this. I will not tolerate bias, I will not tolerate disrespect, and I will not tolerate anyone who thinks they are above the law." Her words echoed in the still room. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in quiet agreement. Kendra could tell who was ready to stand with her and who wasn't, but that didn't matter. She was prepared for the challenge. Over the next few weeks, word of Kendra's encounter spread throughout the community. For some, it was a sign that change was finally on the horizon. For others, it was a wake-up call. The media caught wind of the story, and before long, Kendra became a symbol of what Cedar View needed. Someone unafraid to confront injustice. Someone determined to reform a broken system. But Kendra knew this was just the start. There was still so much work ahead. Every stop, every encounter, every decision would be under the microscope. But she was ready. After all, she hadn't fought all these years to stay silent. Now the fight for justice was far from over. But in that moment, as she drove away from those two humbled officers, Kendra knew one thing for sure. She was exactly where she needed to be.